what we got going here. We got a full squad for you guys today. So we're going to talk AB5. Again, Triple D Day with the three Ds here, Dan, Deigan, Dean, and myself. We have Matthew and Samantha joining us. Talk a little AB5. So get ready, y'all.
To the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
This full squad is fun. I love seeing everybody here. That's crazy. This is the most we ever had on the show at one time. Good. Yeah. There's a good morning already. Good morning, Lisa.
California's in. Morning, Lisa.
Yeah. All right, DJ, kick it off, brother. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Who do you want to kick off? Who'd you say? Anybody?
I can just start talking. I'm very good at that. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me on the program. I'm excited to be here.
Sweet.
We're excited to have you, Matthew. Why don't you kick it off, brother?
I love your
Let's
stuff.
set the stage. We're talking about Assembly Bill 5, AB5, and of course the ABCs, the test that determines if somebody is an employee or a contractor. The law is relatively new, kind of, not quite. It's the codification of a case called Dynamex from 2018. When AB5 first passed, many companies were upset. For example, the gig companies. They spent hundreds of millions of dollars for Proposition 22 and exempted themselves, so they don't apply necessarily to AB5. The trucking organizations fought very hard. They appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit said, no, thank you. That went to the Supreme Court with a petition for certiorari. Please, Supreme Court, grant us reprieve. This law is just so onerous. And the Supreme Court said, we're not interested. And now we're stuck with it. Here we are, AB5. The world has ended. Has it? Probably not, but we'll get into it. That is the background of Assembly Bill 5.
Right.
All right, so
Where was that intro? That was the best intro. Then we should have started with that intro. Shit.
Yeah, I can't top that. So let's just keep going on with that energy.
Dude, you've got a total radio voice.
I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
I felt like
cool.
yeah.
That's
Close my
cool.
eyes, I
Yeah,
was on the
you're
radio.
all over it. That's good.
The key
Jordan,
thing to
Jeff,
understand
that's
about this
Jordan.
bill is what is an employee and what is a contractor. And that is not something that an individual decides. That is a law that is applied to the set of facts. So when there's a hiring entity, and that's the company that pays somebody money, the hiring entity makes the decision. I'm going to call you an independent. I'm going to call you an employee. But the reality is that that designation is just what they say. The law is something different. The law has a test, and the ABC test is that test. We'll probably talk about that test in a moment. But what ends up happening is you can call yourself a contractor, but you're probably not. AB5 has about 70,000 companies that are trucking companies may actually become employees, but that's far broader in the state of California. Over 1 million people may be misclassified. And when you're misclassified, you don't get health insurance. You don't get unemployment insurance. You don't get paid time off. You don't get meal periods. All of these things that you normally get as an employee, you don't have them as a contractor. So this is the real fight about how do I outsource risk and how do I reduce my operational costs?
Yeah.
So, Matthew, one of the questions we've been trying to grapple with at DAT is, we have a lot of freight that moves into the state of California, both on domiciled carriers and domiciled brokers. And of course, there's been some precedent around some out-of-state brokers in relation to CARB violations in years gone by. So one of the questions we really are struggling to answer is, and I'll preface that by saying some of the advice some of our financial experts outside of our company have been giving carriers is to load into California, but deadhead out. Don't load in California, which of course, California is a big state. That's a lot of miles, and that drives up everyone's costs. But the question is, for a non-asset broker in Wisconsin, for example, that brokers a load into California, what are the implications for them, sort of short-term and long-term, on their business?
I love that question. And what you guys do at DAT is absolutely phenomenal. I think what we can talk about, again, this is not legal advice. Anyone watching, get your own lawyer, but this is kind of high-level hypothetical. If you are a non-asset-based broker and you are working with independent contractors, this law doesn't change much of anything for you. What this really focuses on is this, again, that ABC test. Let's spend a minute and walk through the ABCs. So the first one has to do with control. What kind of control do you exert over that driver or that independent contractor? If you're a broker and you're just telling, hey, here's the load, here's where it's going, you're not controlling what they do. You're not making them wear uniforms. You're not making them do a whole bunch of things. So at the very beginning, the control aspect, you're not controlling them. You're fine.
You're probably also, just to quickly add to that, they're most likely working with a lot of brokers. It's not like they're fully dependent on you to keep them moving either.
Good point.
Absolutely.
And that goes to the part C of the test, but we'll get to C in a second. But B has to do with outside the hiring entity scope of business. So if I'm a carrier and I have trucks and I have independents, they're not outside of my scope. The good example is a pool cleaner. If I'm a pool cleaning company and all my pool cleaners are contractors, they're probably employees. If I'm a hotel and I hire a pool cleaner, he's a contractor. That last piece, what Samantha brought up is, what is your independently established business? If you only have one customer and that's all you work for, you're probably an employee. But if you are someone who's using multiple brokers, you're probably not an employee of any of those brokers. So this is a really interesting thing that people should be aware of. This law, AB5, is not different than it was 5 years ago. In 2018, with the Dynamex case, same laws were applying. And before that, there was Borello, and I think it was 89. So these laws have not changed substantially. The way we talk about them and panic about them, that certainly has changed.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Matthew, because from your comment that I did share in our post, you mentioned about codifying and about it's not really changing, but just we all of a sudden cause this uproar of let's make this more than it is. And I think Dean's done a great job with that. Are we in this crazy meltdown like 09 that we discussed back and forth, or what's going on, or 2019?
I would like to say that I think one of the things that's different about this, and I hear a lot of people talking about it. I've been following Matthew's information on this, and we talk about it. And I said, man, I keep hearing from, people in trucking. I keep hearing from lawyers, from brokers. But what I wasn't hearing from is like the actual companies in California, either the big brokers or maybe they own asset trailers and they're contracting their power. And I was like, why am I not hearing anybody talk about that? Like, what is their angle? So I do think that that's kind of why I'm here, is just to represent the fact that there are companies in California specifically because such a big portion of intra-California trucking has to do with drayage that's going to be a lot more severely affected by this than other states would be if they have an ABC rule, just because of the volume that's happening at those ports, specifically in the drayage space. That's a whole different situation.
Let's talk about drayage for a minute. So what happens in drayage tends to be you are a warehousing company or something, and you're moving boxes around. And you say, you are an independent contractor. I'll pay you X amount for every single move. And that's the deal. You say, I'm going to call you an independent contractor. You get paid per X. And the driver goes off and they make 5 moves and they get paid 5X. That's incredible. But then there's a bunch of traffic. And you're like, okay, I've only moved 1 box today. Can I get paid for anything else? No, you don't. This is not a bug, but a feature of how these companies operate. Those people are employees. They don't know that they're employees. They've been classified as independents. And the way this enforcement happens is a driver says, I think I ought to be an employee. And the liability with AB5, but even before AB5, is substantial. But their business models depend on very cheap labor and not having to manage the maintenance, the liability insurance, health insurance, the workers' compensation insurance, and employment insurance. This is why they're going to hurt from this. And it will end up being likely higher cost of goods for all people in America. But that's what the law is. That's what it does.
Right.
And I would just say, I would also say that that's why we saw the protests at the ports. It's these dray providers, the drivers, because they don't want to be someone's employee. They appreciate their independence and the fact that they own their own time. They can take time off whenever they want. If they decide they don't want to run, they don't have to run that by anybody. They get to control how much money they make in a week, because if they want to work more or take on more, they can. They're not hourly. They own their truck. That is theirs. They don't have to lease that from someone, which would likely be what happens if these brokers are running with 200 contracted owner operators, and they have to take them on as employees, what happens to that truck? They probably have to buy it and now lease it
Would
back.
they not also have, like Lisa says, tax implications?
That's what this is all about.
Deductions,
this is millions of dollars of taxes.
Yes.
100%. Millions of dollars of taxes not being collected. Now, to Samantha's point about the drayage operators, what will likely happen is that you will be an employee and that company will lease the truck from you. So you get two payments. This is not new. This has been going on for decades and decades and decades. I will say about the protests, I've looked at this. I've researched it a little bit. I would love to understand what these people actually thought was at stake and maybe who might have been compensating them to be there. Because here's the reality. You think that you're an independent company, and then this AB5 comes and you're not. It's not true. It's not true. The test is a system that looks at the facts of the matter of how you work with that hiring entity. And these people, just like Dynamex, they were employees all along. They didn't know it. And these people who think that they want to have that independence where they can go and move as they want, I think they're going to lose money. That's what they ultimately think, is they're going to make less money. Probably not the case. When you're getting paid for your asset, you're getting paid for your time, you're getting paid to wait, you're getting meal periods and benefits and all these other things, you will probably have a better outcome. And that's just the nature of how these independent relationships work. If these people want to be independent companies, they certainly can. Make a company, make an LLC, have multiple clients. You can be an independent contractor. This law does not stop you from being independent.
But let's talk about that for a second too, because this was a new realization for me. I think that AB5 in the context of like long haul trucking, it's not a big deal. I mean, because if you still want to be independent and you want to be yourself, slap an LLC on the end of your name, on the end of your truck, whatever, and start handling it. Well, now you're handling your own paperwork, you're handling your own, invoicing, you're doing all of this for every load yourself, but that's no big deal if you're doing 3 loads a week, right? Absolutely. But drayage providers are doing 5 loads a day, and they have to do all of that themselves. And also drayage is a little bit different, and I don't know the exact name of it. So someone, if you know, chime in, but you have to basically pay a large lump sum to be able to have your SCAC recognizable for pickups at the port. So you have to now operate under your own SCAC code if you want to be independent to get into the port to pull those containers out. Right. Whereas if you operate through a broker, as a contractor, you are utilizing their SCAC code for everything. So you have easier access without fronting the money to do that if you go through a broker. So at the end of the day, I mean, it puts a lot on the plate of a dray provider to run as the owner of his company independently, both in time spent and money to do so. And it's just incredibly hard to do that.
They sound a lot like employees. Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah. Hey, Matt, how about the recent ruling with Snyder National when it went from the 7th Circuit Court overruled the lower court, saying that one of their independent contractors was actually a employee because they were telling him what to do, how to do it. He truly wasn't independent.
I love that question, Jeff. I love it.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one.
One of the things that was so definitive in that case, I believe, and I'm just remembering from what I read, is that driver as an independent was actually told there are certain companies you don't get to work for. You have to ask us for permission if you're going to haul for Werner or Hunt. And that level of control, we go back to that level of control. Yeah. You can be an independent business. Go ahead and do your thing. But if I'm going to say, here's who you can and can't work with, that sounds a lot different. And so these companies know what they're doing. I want to be very clear. These are very highly sophisticated companies. They get sued every year all across the country in classification lawsuits. Like I just look at FedEx Ground, for example. Ground, their drivers, everyone comes to your house, it's a contractor. Same with Amazon. They're all contractors. They know the game. And so when you see this case with Schneider, it just goes to show, if you want to have owner operators, give them freedom to go work for whoever they want to. And if you don't do that, be prepared to pay back wages, overtime, all the compensation, all the fuel, all these things, reimbursement claims. Yeah. Those are very compelling.
Right. Yeah. The one thing that stood out to me when I read that article was that he was forced to take unprofitable loads.
Yes, exactly.
And so, I mean, when you look at that, man, that's going to set some serious precedents across the nation for sure on that.
The greatest innovation in transportation after deregulation in 1980 was the rise of independent contractors. The ability to say, I want work performed a certain way, but I don't want any of the risk. I don't want any of the cost with that. I want someone else to take on those costs and lower the cost of goods for Americans. And it did it. It did it. That's why in 1980, the average salary for an over-the-road truck driver was $38,000, which today is like $120,000. What's the average compensation for an over-the-road trucker today? Not that. That's not that amount. So this is the world we live in, man. And Jeff, that's a great point. Like, we're going to watch these trucking companies make these adjustments and say, okay, well, we're going to be more friendly to power only. You can bring your trailers, use our trailers. We'll have a great time. But that level of control and how you force people to do things, force dispatch, you're looking a lot like an employer, And that ABC test is in 20 states. It's not like it's just California. It's everywhere. It's everywhere.
Yes.
I love the law.
Not everywhere has ports, but also
we have rail yards. The same thing. Rail yards, same thing.
There's a question here. Every employees don't hire their own workers. Employees don't have business entities. Employees don't pick up and choose their loads. They're among those who California is reclassifying, is what Brandon's saying here.
So, to push back on what Brandon's saying, I think it's a good point. The employees, they don't know what they're doing. They're doing what the hiring entity says. If I was a cashier at Walmart and I said, I'm actually a contractor, no one would believe me. They'd say, what are you talking about? Why do you care about what? No, it's not how this works. Trucking is weird because that employee, that person is gone most of the day. You don't see them. They have their own routes, all these different things. So trucking is kind of this weird aberration. But again, it doesn't matter what the hiring entity says. And it doesn't matter what the employee says. We look at the facts, we apply them to the law, and you have an outcome. And that's exactly what's happened with AB5 and the case before that, which was Dynamex, the case before that, which was Borello.
Hi, Jory.
Yeah, Jory. I love Jory Myers. He's a good dude. Good dude.
I think something
Got his
else
baby
that I
coming.
really-
Jory, it's going to happen.
Something I want to mention too about California is that I just kind of find interesting is that there will be opportunity now for the union to expand their footprint in California, because if these employees, if these independent contractors are going to now become employees, and you have whatever it is, drayage providers or trucking companies going from 10 employees to 250 employees now, then your union is going to be knocking on that door wanting these people to unionize, and they might choose to if that's what they decide to do. So it's also an opportunity for union expansion in California.
I like that point. I think we can, if I can talk about that for a moment. When it comes to unions and trucking generally, 1980, 60% of truckers were unionized, 60%. Today, it's less than 10% in most cases. So the idea that a union could come knocking on your door and convert your people, it's always a risk. It is always a risk. Companies like OD, for example, don't have that risk, generally speaking, because they pay well. They know how to take care of their people. So if you want to avoid unionization, take care of your people. That's the answer.
Yes.
If your answer is the only way to stop the union is to make everybody contractors, you're going to die. You're going to get eaten alive by companies.
Such a great point, Matt. That is.
Yeah.
Take care of your employees. You don't have to worry about that then.
I did some fishing on that, and I think pretty much what I'm hearing is that in order to take care of your employees, number one, just be a good employer, right? Like, be a good person to work for. But then when it comes down to pay also, essentially you'd have to be $30 plus an hour for your people to avoid the temptation of the union helping get higher pay. So you're looking at $30 to $35 an hour for all of these like 200 drivers you just brought on as employees. And that goes back to what we talked about already about just the increase in costs for these brokers, and we know that everything gets passed along. And I can't name sources, but I talked with one pretty large drayage provider on the West Coast, and basically what they said is that they've seen the cost right now dropping for transporting these containers, and it's coming down maybe $50, $75 a container or whatever it is, and they've been seeing that recently. They are not going to pass that along to the customer yet, because they might, once these rules come out for what exactly has to be done for AB5, they're expecting their costs to go up. So they're like, we put ourselves in a bad position to say, hey, let's give you a break here. And then in 2 months, all of a sudden, we need that and some more. So there's cost savings right now already that could be passed along that are hanging in the balance because of just the uncertainty around AB5.
There's two things I want to mention.
Go ahead, Matt. There's just one thing that I've always wondered when it comes to Dre, and I apologize for my voice, everybody. Dre seems so cheap for the amount of time a driver sits under a can. Right. Like sits in line, in the port, gets the can, gets out, gets delivered, and gets
yeah.
back. It's pennies on the hour, I find.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
That's
I
what it's supposed to be, because they're
Yeah.
employees and they know that. They don't know it, but that's why it's so cheap. I mean, if they had to pay, and we'll talk about the penalties and why this is going to be so compelling for so many companies. But I had 50 employees in the state of California. I had captured garages for the largest parcel carrier that has ever existed in California. So I know the nature of like classification and all the liabilities. But to your point, Dan, why is it so cheap? Because they're not paying for it. They're not paying the real cost. The state of California does. California's having to pay all the expenses that person can't do on their own. But to talk about like what happens next, this is what's so interesting. We didn't talk in the other stuff about PAGA, the Private Attorney General Act, but this is how people sue to change the classification of what they've been decided at. And the penalties you have are not only attorney's fees. So I sue you for $500 an hour. Everything that I get in my time, you pay me as a company. But you have to pay back wages, pay overtime, pay all of the benefits, the fines for not carrying workers' compensation. These types of things are uninsurable losses. No policy you can buy from Travelers or State Farm will cover misclassification. So people can be on the and talk like this is a terrible law, it's going to cause problems. But when you get sued and you're dealing with classification, you will likely go bankrupt. You're talking that tens of thousands of dollars a month in litigation costs. And that could be everybody who's ever been with your company over the last 3-4 years are all suing for those back benefits. And what bank is going to say, well, let me loan you $2 million to pay off this litigation bill? It's incredible. So if
Hey, Matthew, I have a question about, because you probably know this better than any of us right now. Where do we stand with AB5 as far as we know that it's coming, we know that it's here, but I feel like companies are still kind of just sitting, going, what exactly do you want from me to ensure that I am going to be compliant with this? Why have we not seen that yet? And when is that expected?
It is because of the
question,
media.
Samantha.
It is
Great
because
question.
of the media making this thing all about whether we're going to repeal it, whether we're going to have protests. They're not saying, okay, here's what happens now. So before AB5, Dynamex was the law of the land in California. If you were in California working with your local chamber of commerce or your state chamber of commerce or your trucking association and saying, what do I do next? They have recommendations. Here's who you get. Here's a lawyer you can call. Here's the accountants to start working with. Here's the benefit providers. They all know. But from our side in the national media, it has been, well, they appealed it to the Supreme Court, so maybe it'll get reversed. Anybody who was watching that case would have said, of course it won't. Of course it won't. If classification at the employee level is a state thing. It has nothing to do with the feds. Even we have a very conservative court, some would say, they're not going to take this case. So Samantha, that's an amazing question. It's an amazing point. And it just goes to show the media has done a disservice to the companies that have to deal with this. They're left saying, I don't know, maybe it'll get repealed. It's not going to get repealed. It's not going to get repealed. It's there. It's there. That's what it is.
So who in the state of California, I mean, the state of California needs to give very clear guidelines to the companies in California on here are the do's and the don'ts, and here's what's going to land you in a big litigation if you don't do this. Because these people, you know, I've talked to some people out there, and they're basically like, man, the first person to try to adjust to this is the first loser. Because nobody knows exactly what's supposed to be done. They know it's going to cost a lot of money. And then if they try to change and they get it at all wrong, and you mess something up and you have to redo, or you're not actually going to be, compliant once the clear rules come out. So everybody's just kind of waiting. Not everybody, but at least let's talk about the drapes.
It hurts me to hear that. Dynamex was a trucking company. That's the 2018 case where they said, we're going to fire all of our truck drivers. We're going to call them employees. And then we're going to fire them all, and we're going to call them independent contractors, and we're going to save a bunch of money. And they're like, oh my gosh, we're saving so much money. And then they got sued, and they lost. So like the idea that companies need to wait, that's wrong. If I was giving advice to any company now, is call your attorney and say, look at my independent contractors, look at my contracts. Because again, FedEx and Amazon have done this for a long time. They know exactly how to avoid liability.
Yeah, they're not getting caught. They're not getting caught.
They get sued every year. Every year every year they win.
I got to get moving, everybody. I apologize. I got to get to radiation. But Matthew, Samantha, Jeff, Dean, thank you so much for being here. DJ, as always, buddy, you're a rock star. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Dan.
I'll catch up with you all after. Definitely.
Matt, so being new to you made a comment about it just being an expansion of something that's already there. So I'm not familiar with all of the crazy rules and laws, but was involved in sales side of a sales organization trying to open up new offices. They're an ADT authorized dealer, and just opening into California, and this was maybe 12. And even then, there were so many different hoops, laws, and regulations, overtime, this, that, and all of these things. It seems very familiar to this. So is it the same? Is it just a little bit different? Is it something they made bigger?
100% the same. In the state of California, I'm not speaking as if I'm in the state of California. In California, we care about meal periods. We care about overtime. If you work over 8 hours in a day, you're getting overtime. It's not about 40 hours in a week. It's about 8 hours in a day. So California's version of how they pay people and how they calculate time is really big. If you miss a meal period, and with mobile guys with ADT, they miss a meal period, what's the penalty? 1 hour overtime and a fine. So you have to have people sign waivers every day saying, I waive my meal period. These laws are generally applicable employment regulations. They apply to truck drivers. Now, over the road, not so much because they're doing overstates, doing interstate stuff. But if you're an intrastate, you're driving just in your state, you are going to be subject to all of these things. So some companies say, I don't want to do business in the state of California. If you were to take California as its own thing, make it its own country, 7th largest economy in the world, 40% of all freight comes from Long Beach and Oakland. This is and LA. This is a place you don't get to exempt yourself from. This is the cost of doing business and transportation. In California, they are an interesting state to do business in.
Yes.
And I just,
thank you.
40% of all business is coming through those ports of our goods, and most of them are being pulled right now by independent contractors.
That's right.
With a truck that's pulling a container. So I think that the reason, and again, I'm sympathizing with these people because you talked about, well, how do they not know already what they're supposed to be doing? Because up until a couple of months ago, what they were doing was entirely legal and compliant. And that was just the truth. Like they were doing it for years. Businesses were built that way. I'm talking drayage only. I'm not going to get into trucking. But the way these guys were doing this, these contractors were working with them. Maybe they're pulling their assets, maybe whatever the situation is. And that's how their business has always operated. They've been inspected. I don't know. I assume they're passing tests to be able to do that. And so I'm just really curious to understand, if it wasn't legal all this time, why has that been how it's operated?
That gets to PAGA. So let me give me a moment, DJ, and everyone, to kind of set the stage. When did Pluto become not a planet? What changed about Pluto? What changed about it? Well,
it doesn't. Does it not have enough moons or something?
No, that's a good question. Let's go through it. So what makes a planet? The first thing is it has to orbit a star. So it orbits the sun. Mm-hmm. Cool. It has to have a ball. It has to be a sphere. We call it hydrostatic equilibrium. When it's a sphere, that's the next part of the test. The final part of the test is it clears its orbital path. So as it goes around, there's other debris, and Pluto doesn't clear it. Same with Ceres. There's an asteroid in the asteroid belt called Ceres. 25% of the mass of the asteroid belt is Ceres. This is an amazing. You look at it, you go, that's a planet. Here's the thing, Samantha. This is why I go use the planet analogy. Just because we change the definition doesn't change the characteristic of the thing. So these drayage operators, there's a test that says what they are. The challenge is California lacks the resources to enforce and audit all this stuff. They defer to the hiring entity. When that person then says, I think I might be an employee, the state of California says, we assume you're right. We assume you're an employee. We assume that hiring entity is wrong. Prove me wrong, hiring entity. And so this thing of the drayage operators, they were employees all along. They didn't know it. Now, what happens in California is this thing called the Private Attorney General's Act. What that means is I can, as a state of California, give the right to enforce those laws of California Labor Code to a private attorney to sue on behalf of the state of California to enforce the laws. And when that happens, that PAGA claim, 75% of what you get goes to the state of California. So what's going to happen over the next period of time, now that the attorneys are like, wait, I can make a ton of money suing people that wrongfully classify people? That sounds amazing. So these drayage operators, they don't know. Their job is to know how to move this box to that location and back again. That's what they're good at. That's what they do every day. They don't know that the hiring entity intentionally or negligently misclassified them. Goes back to the planet. It's a great question, great test. And you just got to apply the law.
I think I'm excited for the people who would prefer to be employees and didn't understand that would be like maybe that they feel that's in their benefit, but they just didn't know. So I think this is a good thing for the people, right, who want to be an employee and they don't want to have to do everything themselves, and they want someone to provide their insurance and their overtime and whatever that is. And I'm like, truly hope the best outcome for these people. But then the part of me that's like, if you want to do your own thing, do your own thing, and don't make anybody else tell you what to do, is like dying inside for the people who want to stay independent, because there are going to be some, right? And so, I mean, I guess they'd have to, what do they do, Matt? Let's talk about that. What did those people do? Could they potentially, instead of trying to become their own, handle everything themselves, could they just diversify out and now run Dre moves for 3 different brokers? Like, is that
100%? I recommend, again, not legal advice. Don't take legal advice from a television show. But the advice I would give to somebody hypothetically is start a business, make an LLC, get multiple clients, run your own operating authority, do the way you want to do it, and you'll probably make more money too. The reality is that you can still be independent. There's a ton of independent companies in the state of California. You just have to make sure you satisfy all these tests. But I would talk to the California Trucking Association, Harbor Freight Association. You can ask them, hey, I want to be protected. I want to have my own company. I want to carry my own liability insurance and manage my maintenance and all of these things. So that's how I would kind of look at this. And I would explore ways to continue being independent. Jeff is back. Hello, Jeff. Good to see you, my friend.
Hey, and I will say, going back to your point, Matthew, in the beginning, I mean, it's if they're doing only work for one company, they are an employee. I mean, and you should just know that to be a company, you're doing work for multiple, businesses, and you're just handling it on your own. So
DJ, if we take that into like consulting work, it's in our industry too, right? Like you can be an independent contractor, 1099 as a consultant. So a lot of times a company will hire someone to consult and even go so far as to give them a title. And like you basically work full time for this company as their director, as their VP, as their CFO, as whatever it is that they're hiring you for. And you might choose to do that for 6, 12, 10 months without doing a single other thing. But the point is, if someone knocked on your door in month 8 and said, I want you to consult for my company, and you say, okay. Because you don't have to go get approval to give any hours of your time to somebody else now and make money there. So it's just like you can be content with working with one person as that contractor, but you don't want to lose the freedom and the autonomy to say, but I also want to be able to make money when it comes knocking on my door and I like it without losing what I'm doing now. So again, I'm just like, I'm trying to be like this sympathetic antagonizer, right? For the other side of this situation. But these are things that come up to me because I always try to like play both sides of the situation, where I don't want to be locked in as your employee because, man, if someone said tomorrow, hey, here's what I want you to do and you can make money, you could do it. But when you're someone's employee, you don't get to take on these like side hustles in the same industry, giving hours of your workday also to that. So there's a difference there as well.
Yes, no, great point.
Now, I have a question from Dean. And Dean, you want to say the question and I can answer it for the folks on the...
It's a question that's been asked a lot by carriers and posed by some of the leading financial experts in the industry, and it is related to some of the options that are given out. Includes, moving out of the state, move your residence out of the state if you're an owner operator, get your own authority, which you've covered. We've talked about becoming an employee, but option 4 really raises some concerns to me because I don't fully understand and it doesn't quite make sense. Option 4 is for an owner operator to avoid, I guess, AB5 and being caught up in the compliance issue. Option 1 of that would be you can deliver loads into California, but part 2 cannot pick up loads in California. Could you explain that a little bit more? Because it doesn't quite make sense to me based on what I've heard today anyway.
Yeah, so It doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. The question I would be asking for someone thinking about this is, when do you have to be concerned about being classified as an employee? So first of all, you have to have a person who wants to be classified. So California is not coming in and auditing everybody. What's happening is big companies are saying, okay, I have a brokerage business, I have an asset business, and maybe in California, if I put my own independents out there, they're going to be employees, they're going to sue me, and I'm going to have a bunch of trouble. If you're an owner operator and you're using a broker who is not asset based, who is just doing the brokering thing, you're not going to get classified as anything. And the state's not coming knocking on your door. What's typically happening in these cases is someone who has been misclassified sues their former hiring entity and says, you misclassified me, I want a bunch of money. So coming into the state of California doesn't change anything about your being an independent business, working with other companies. It sounds like it might be some risk management pathway, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, if you are doing a ton of California, this idea of the two payment model, that you get paid for your asset, you get paid as an employee, that makes sense if you're hired just with one brokerage entity. But every truck driver multi-homes. Multi-homing is this idea that as a trucker, I'm going to a load board, or I'm going to a digital freight matching company, or I'm talking to shippers directly. And that ability to multi-home makes you independent. Like, the facts of this test don't change. They're all the same. So I think that fourth one of, like, you can take a load in, but you can't take a load out, that doesn't make sense to me, unless that hiring entity is really concerned that that person might just turn around and sue them.
And let's take an example of, say, a leased on owner operator in Phoenix who runs into Los Angeles and back every day. So he's working for a carrier out of Phoenix, leased on. So essentially he's an employee under the ABC test. Yeah. And then he goes into California. If he was working for just one company on the return load out of Los Angeles, they would be caught up in the ABC test. They would fail the ABC test, if I understand it.
100%. I mean, and that's a great point. So the ABC test, again, it's California uses it, but so does 20 other states. So you actually might have people that are operating as independents, not realizing they're actually employees. And this leased business where you, as a trucking company, give them access to the asset and they're paying you something for the asset and all this stuff, those models may not survive in this environment. I think you're going to have a lot of challenges there, especially if you only have one person giving you all the work. That's not likely going to be a good solution.
I like these examples of situations because, again, like, a lot of people are of the opinion that this is just easy. This is common sense. This is no big deal. But there's always going to be, like, those niches where there's certain situations where it's like, no, you have to think a little bit harder now. Like, is this or is this not? And just especially with, I feel like, the state of California, because it's just so unique in what it does and the business that flows in and out of it. And like you just said, Dean, with the surrounding states, that happens a lot. Containers move a lot, or even just from warehouses right across from California to Nevada back to California, and just those type of situations. So I just think it's interesting that everybody has to figure out, what does this mean for me based on our model and how we're executing.
And these big companies have attorneys on retainer that are helping them figure out what strategies they're going to employ to get the victory. And they're also probably spending tons of money lobbying, trying to get laws changed. So there's
what about the small companies?
Yeah, small companies they're being taken advantage of by everybody. That's how it's yes. Like that's the model. That's what it is.
That's the truth. Thank you for saying the truth. We do have a LinkedIn. We do have a LinkedIn user. I don't know who it is, but it says, "Does Canada have anything like this?" I don't know this. Do you guys know that? Anybody on here?
I don't know. I will say this. Each one of the provinces have their own regulatory authority. And so there are certainly going to be ones that are very similar to California, probably. And again, this type of test, just because we have ABC here, there's a bunch of versions of things like this. So my expectation is most states that have and provinces have some form of labor law have something similar to this, I would expect.
Hey, Matthew, I was curious about this one. It dropped a while ago, again, from Brandon. It said AB5 expands the ABC test into areas it wasn't previously, work comp, unemployment. Do you know anything about that?
I know exactly about that. It was always there. So, okay, yeah, that's good. I love esoteric legal things. So, no, if you misclassify somebody, what do you have to pay for? And what typically happens is you have to pay the unemployment insurance, you have to pay workers' compensation insurance, you have to pay all of these things. And those happen when you misclassify. So the expansion of these things is not new. When people were suing under the Dynamex case and under the California labor law, they would have those as additional penalties. And the state of California would assert those penalties. So I would suggest that it has not expanded what Dynamex was doing and the actual liability you face. Because the reality is, if you own a business, the two things you can't miss are your insurance payments and your payroll. You miss those two things, you're out of business. And so when you're hiring all these independent contractors, you get net terms on everything. I pay you net 30. I pay you net 60. That's when you get paid. You can float all of these things. But when you have an employee and you have these types of insurance you must have, you don't have them. California smashes you in the mouth. You have to have those things.
Yeah. And then he said, what if I feel like I'm making enough money with one client MC and don't need others? The key is the opportunity to work for others, not necessarily the fact they do so. And that's the argument that I made too with when I talked about the independent consulting. I feel you on that one, Brandon. But I mean, I think there's still going to be certain situations where it's like too bad, so sad, because if you're going to work for the same company for 2 years, but you want the independence to do something, you're an employee unless you go make yourself an actual business.
And I want to just kind of emphasize this, that a lot of people don't realize we have an adversarial system in America when it comes to litigation and how you do things. So this test, ABC, under AB5 says we are going to presume the hiring entity is actually making you an employee. If you come up and say, I don't want you to presume that, California. I'm actually independent. I love it. I'm having a great time. That case doesn't happen. So the only time you have these fights, these big fights about classification, is when one side thinks the other side is lying. No, I'm not a contractor. I'm an employee. So to Brandon's point, if you want to stay as an independent, don't sue your company. That's what this is about. It's about suing companies. Don't sue them. You're fine. California's not going to come knocking on your door. Hey, can we sue your employer for you? No.
Hey,
although they might get a bunch of calls from lawyers in New York. Just for sake,
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, Matthew, were you in high school or college? Did you do like debate or forensics or any like drama classes or anything?
I did theater, but I'm a lawyer. So what I love is I love to negotiate and explain things. Like the whole goal for me is to say, what is a topic that sounds complicated? And let's make it simpler. Let's break it down and say, this is what it is. This is how it builds. This is how you think about it. So I appreciate that question. I do a little bit, but no, I just have all the paperwork.
Yeah. I did theater and improvised duet acting. So you get like 5 minutes to prep who you are, the situation, and where you're at, and all this. And it's like that's why I'm good at these things. I just make this up as I go sometimes. So. 5 minutes to prep.
Brandon does say, "Love you, Matt." We just disagree on these points.
I can argue the other side. Like I've been
disagree.
I've been very transparent. I've been kind of like explaining AB5 and what the laws are. But if you want me to put the other hat on and be like the guy who hates AB5, I can absolutely do that for you.
That's kind of what I was trying to be here for you, Matt, was just to give you a little bit of that contention. So
can I pose a question? There's already a shift in imports to the East Coast that's been going on since the pandemic started. The numbers are in favor of the East Coast and the Gulf Coast ports in particular. Yep. So if you're a shipper and you've got an east-west, inland intermodal strategy, and you've got this imaginary line where it's cheaper to send freight to the East Coast, and clearly people have been doing that, doesn't this sort of suggest that anything you send into Los Angeles and Long Beach is just going to cost you a lot more over time, and that you therefore maybe need to permanently send a lot more freight to the East Coast, who, by the way, are deepening their ports and putting in higher ship-to-shore cranes to handle ever-given level ships in ports like Charleston? To me, it looks like California loses pretty big time for the shippers that have an inland strategy where they've got to move that freight into Kansas City, Dallas or Chicago.
True. You're 100% right. For these major boats, there's only a few ports in the world along the West Coast that can actually receive those giant ships. But with Panama being expanded, Savannah and Houston are ready to gobble up your capacity. And what they've been so good with, like what Amazon did was they saw the backups in the port of Long Beach, said, okay, we'll just go through Panama. And if you can make it that your value proposition is speed, because to your other point, Dean, longshoremen aren't on the East Coast. The longshoremen is the strongest union that has ever existed in the United States. They don't have a contract right now. They're negotiating that, is my understanding. But like that is another major barrier, that these East Coast ports don't have that same union issue, and they have the ability to move much quicker, more automation. But I think you're right. This is that fine line we walk. Now the reality is that
okay, I'm just going to say that this is, even if this does happen, this will be a long progression, because we just need the West Coast to handle throughput. And that is all there is to it. It's always going to have a good chunk of it. And honestly, the more that swings to the East Coast, the more attractive all those rates are going to look on the West Coast, and it's going to draw people back. And that's already happening. The rates are already getting softer on the West Coast right now. And people are already going, yeah, well, there's still these labor negotiations, but it's worth it. Because there's this congestion on the East Coast, because the East Coast just isn't ready to handle it. And they're building it out. But something that I found interesting when I toured, this was like back in 19 or 20, I don't remember. I toured the port of Savannah, and they talked about how Savannah is poised to become a giant, because they have bought and have access to all the land around the existing port, so they can continue to grow out more terminals, I'm going to get the word wrong, but for the ships to come up and actually offload, whereas a lot of other East Coast ports are landlocked and there's no room for expansion. So you can try to automate what's already there to help it go faster, but you're not going to actually expand the entire operation, because you're going to have a hard time getting any more physical footprint there.
Right.
And so not just landlocked, but like locked by other industries and unpurchasable land, essentially, or government regulations, or whatever it is, wildlife preserves. I don't know, but it's really hard to expand there. And that's why I think Savannah has been working now for years, and they're still growing. And it's going to take them, like, when I was there, I think they said 7 years to get like the next one built. So you have to think like the time that goes into those massive operations. And I think we'll eventually, in the future, we're going to be at a point where the East Coast is handling a lot more. And I think that the pandemic helped accelerate people's willingness to adopt the East Coast, because it's a longer route, right? That's another thing, is that it takes a little bit longer to get there. You're going to have to, there's warehousing space has been pretty much busting at the seams over there, because it wasn't ready for that type of infrastructure. There's a lot of things that go into that. So it'll be some time.
Yeah, all the warehouses are suffering immensely. I mean, look at Prologis, largest warehouse operation in the world at 964 million square feet. And they went out to their client base and said, you know what, we don't have the excess space to take care of extra inventory. But besides that, now you've got the congestion, you've got the steam line, online, in-gate and out-gate appointment process, which is busted. Which, I mean, look at the steamship lines when they're posting billions and billions of dollars every quarter. There's no incentive for them to change that online appointment process, because they're making a ton of money. I mean, you've got dray carriers that are going in there. They got an appointment. They wait there for 5 or 6 hours. They get to the gate and they get turned away. I mean, it's like
all unpaid unless they make that move.
Yeah, there you go, man.
Right. And to Dan's point, when he said about how do these dray carriers make money? I mean, it's unbelievable. I do a lot of dray moves out of the West Coast and talk to a lot of dray carriers out there. And the thing is that, do they have control over this appointment process? They don't. I mean, if they don't have the ability to take in chassis or empty cans, don't give out appointment numbers. Don't give out times. Say there's a cutoff. I mean, it's just crazy. It's unbelievable.
And we could go on. We could talk about the West Coast metering intermodal to the East Coast, and the East Coast metering it back out. And our rail situation is not pretty domestically right now. And so there's just a lot that we're trying to figure out that's not going to be a quick fix. And so
it also has to do with the shippers not being compliant and using those containers as excess warehousing, because they don't have the room to house it. So they're going to sit on it, and dwell times are going to go out through the and they're just taking advantage of it.
And what does a container sit on?
What's that?
What does a container sit on? Sits on a chassis. And how many of those do we have just laying around as extras right now?
Well, the other thing is that they can't rebuild the chassis as well, just like the automotive business out there, where they have, problems with chips and coming in from the packed rim. Well, guess what? A lot of the chassis out there need some of these parts as well. So they're not readily available where you can fix these, retrofit, or whatever you need to do to get them roadworthy, to get them back to where they need to be. So that's another problem within the system.
Just to build off of that point, when it comes to chassis, there's about 500,000 some odd amount, but about half of them were built before 1997. Isn't that exciting? Doesn't that make you feel safe on those roads?
Yeah.
They're
I want to talk about that, Matthew.
Absolutely. That's a horse of a different color.
Yeah. The other thing that I've noticed is that things haven't changed a lot in terms of productivity on our ports, especially on the West Coast. It's I was a dray operator 40 years ago in Sydney, where the Transport Workers Union had a foothold, and they took their lead from the ILWU most of the time. I've spent 24 hours trying to get a box out of the port, get locked in overnight, get turned away. Forklift will probably drive past my truck and the container that I'm next to a dozen times during the day. And I watch a lot of guys on social media, and it just doesn't appear a lot has changed in that period of time. Ports globally, I shouldn't say globally because a lot of other ports are automated, but ports particularly here and in other companies where the unions have a pretty strong foothold. So that's the other part of this equation is port throughput. I think Samantha touched on it a little bit earlier when it comes to East Coast ports, because that's going to be the key to, I think, our economy. I remember the head of Georgia Ports said last year, and it was quite a profound statement, but he said, when the US supply chain gets over 2 million TEU per month consistently, we get into trouble. Mm-hmm. And we just had 2.2 million TEU, the 9th highest volume of import TEU ever. And we've been above 2 million TEU for the best part of, I think, about 20 months now. Yeah. So there's no sort of data that says what the exact TEU import volume to reach equilibrium. But what he's saying is that we just have a supply chain system that's built around a certain volume, and we've been way above that for too long. I just don't know how we change that.
What do you think about, to your point about business moving to the East Coast, maybe this is a long shot, but maybe as more business moves to the East Coast because they're able to automate a little bit more, and they just in general, people are open to the idea. I think we could maybe see that impact the West Coast and the unions in their ability to maybe be more adaptive to these automation technologies because they're going to start to feel that when you used to have, 70% of the world's imports, and now you have 40. Right. So because people are basically just saying it's easier to do it over here because of what they're doing. So maybe there'll be more of a willingness to mimic those processes on the West Coast.
Yeah, I did a show yesterday with Professor Kaplis from MIT, and he asked the question, do you think it'll be permanent? And I think it will be permanent because of A, what's going on the West Coast and people's reluctance to get caught up in it, but B, the investment port authorities have been making in their infrastructure. And, if you deepen Charleston to 52 feet and you can take a 24,000 TEU vessel in, the Suez Canal becomes a very viable option in terms of a trade route. And there's a lot more people that, that live on the East Coast that buy things that come from Asia. And I think that's going to change things permanently once truckload carriers start to reposition their assets there permanently. There's a lot of open space between, the Mississippi River and the West Coast, and the carriers, you've got to really know your stuff if you want to run across that. So I think there's going to be a heavier concentration of freight on the East Coast over time. It's just sort of
California just kind of baffles me, and I enjoy watching what goes on there because I know California is this state was, and I don't know where this has gone in progression, but they were kind of toying with the idea of a mandated 4-day work week for any companies that employed more than 100 people. And so think about all the logistics companies in California, the warehouses that are turning this stuff that employ 500 people and cutting that down or paying significant amounts of overtime or whatever you have to do to be able to operate. And that gets passed through. So California itself is just making it more expensive for companies to do business there.
Yep. Absolutely.
And Dean, to your point, and Samantha, to your point, obviously COVID caused this shift. We are having this great shift of, okay, let's figure out all this outdated, to Dean's point, outdated system that only allowed us to bring in X. And now we need, there's crazy stuff going on over here. And this is typically the old way because we only brought in so much TEU. This is where we're coming from. Well, now we're shifting everything, but it's just, collaboration. I mean, we talk about it all the time on the show. It's collaboration, and it's pushback from certain groups and certain things that aren't willing to shift when everything else is saying we need to go this way. They're saying, I want to stay this way.
Right.
Yeah, there's a huge lack of it. Huge lack of collaboration. I laugh, because you hear about collaboration now more than ever before. It's like, what the hell have you done over the last 20 years? What made you shift to say, you know what, we should start collaborating? My benefit. It's like, why have you waited?
Why
what have you been doing if you haven't been collaborating?
I mean, it's just like, how do you? I mean, if you're in logistics, how do you not do business without collaborating? I mean, you have to do that. I mean, if you want to be successful and you want to start bringing people all together, get them on the same page, let's go back to the ports really, really quick. And we can have another conversation about this, but when you have
I'll throw it out there. It's the big guys. They don't have to collaborate. They make their own rules.
But I'm just saying, when you got the ports, the ports have been working 24/7 for a while now. It's not something new. Okay. The problem is that if you want it to work efficiently and get more productive from it, how about getting the warehouses on the same page and have them work at the 24/7? Right. Because you got the dray carriers, they go in there, they pick up the product, they bring it to the warehouse, and guess what? They don't open until 7 o'clock in the morning. They pick the can up at 12 o'clock at night. They sit there. Yeah, really efficient. I mean, that makes a lot of things. I mean, they did extended port usage because a long time ago they wanted to take the congestion off the 405, the big grid pattern out there in LA. And they figured, well, you know what? If we got dray carriers in there late at night, we can alleviate some of the problems and make it more efficient. Well, guess what, guys? You failed. It just doesn't work, and it's happening across all segments on every single port out there. Things have to change. This is not going to get better. And I said this a long time ago on my post. This is going well into 2023. I don't care what anybody says here. There's a lot of adjustments to do. And then when you got the U.S. government, I'm not going political, but we as professionals in the logistics field have to have our finger on the damn pulse every single day to understand what the hell is happening. So when the government goes out to certain people and bring them in every month or every 2 months and say, I need help in figuring this out, do you really think, I don't care it is out there that comes in every 2 months that they're going to solve the problem of supply chain logistics? No, it's not going to happen.
They could call us. They could call the 5 of us. Couldn't
yeah,
they?
what? You should be
We're very good at what we do. We're the best.
I've been in the business for a long,
so we do have to close up, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been amazing. But so Rachel does say 4-day work week was adopted by her old company, Cintas. They found that their drivers were not hurt as often and were overall happier and stayed longer.
Is that?
I think we love the idea of 4-day work weeks for companies like that. And we get terrified when we're talking about supply chains and port movement in California, right?
The one thing I'll put on the 4-day work week in California, just a caveat here, is it has to do with making it so you don't have overtime after 8 hours. So you have to have a statute that allows you to have someone work 10 hours in a day and not have overtime those last 2 hours. So it's an optional thing that you can do as an employer and say, here's it, or 312 or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of companies out there that work 3 days, 12-hour shifts.
Yeah. And I say just on the collaboration piece, everybody wants to collaborate as long as they listen to my version of it. And everyone has that. Like, we're all going to collaborate. Just do what I say. And like, oh, that sounds a lot like not collaboration. Like, no, you're wrong. It is. It feels that way to me.
Well, guys, I have stuck my son with our sales team now for an hour, so that's probably terrifying for them. But I'm going to run, and thank you so much for having me on, DJ and Dan. And shout out to everyone who watched and interacted in the comments. I see Melissa and Rachel and some other awesome people too. So I appreciate it. This was really fun too. I loved this style. I think it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Rachel said, Samantha Jones on the scene. Hey, thank you for joining us, Samantha. It was awesome. I'll just throw up the last few comments and then we'll close out. Graham says, this is the liveliest LinkedIn Live I've seen in a while.
Reliance Partners, let's go.
Straight up sales pitch. Yes. Hey, Graham, thank you. We're not here to sell you anything. We're just here to try to help figure out what the hell is going on. Greg says, "Dear U.S. government, call Matthew." Yes, I agree. Call Matthew. He'll tell you what to do. Just listen to him. Watch a show. U.S. government figured out already. Hashtag collaborate.
Yes, collaborate.
To Son. I agree. We'll leave that up there. Again, thank you, everybody, for joining us. Samantha, Matthew, oh my gosh, thank you guys.
Thanks,
again,
guys.
for Dan and myself. Dean, as always, we love having you on, the mad scientist of data. And Jeff, man, thank you for just being you and filling in and being such a huge help.
Thank you,
seriously. All the information, hopefully you guys gained all the information you need from this. Watch the replay. We do replay this back at 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock daily. Again, Sales Chatter Live, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. till 9:30 Eastern Standard Time, except Triple D Day till 10. Get your information on logistics here. Thank you all. Quote to take us out. I will take us out with a quote as usual. And the quote, hopefully you guys enjoy this one. So this is W. Edwards Deming, and it is, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Remember that, guys.
I like it. We had a lot.
In trucking, our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Damon at American Logistics